mic off people.
Okay, well, I represent one of those communities that Paul was just speaking about. By the way, it's good to be on the same platform. And Amy, what a brilliant person, what a brilliant role you played. Every single meeting with Jeremy and the inner team, Amy was there, really strong, determined, a fighter for our class and for socialism. And I pay tribute to her, the work she did under Jeremy and the work she's now doing for such a mighty, radical, progressive union. Amy, it's brilliant to be on the platform with you too. All right, okay. Let me also just say to those who haven't seen him yet, our brilliant chair, Ian Lavery, is in the audience. For me, he will always be our chair, the chair of the left movement, which was beginning to build a different kind of society and which we can go on to do. Look, I represent 23 former mining villages in the heart of Yorkshire. I think I come from the heart of England. And I heard what Paul said about communities in the north of England. I'm not going to speak for them. I'm going to let a woman speak for herself. She sent me an email 3 hours ago. Because I don't find racism ingrained. I find despair ingrained and a willingness to fight back, to get behind a leadership which would fight. But I also get the impression of people saying to me, I don't want a Labour Party that's like a chocolate fireguard that melts as soon as you put the fire on. They want a fighting Labour Party. Let me let her speak for herself. She says, I joined the party, and I got this 2 hours ago by chance, because I believe that we could have a fairer society, greener society, less divided communities. That's why I joined the Labour Party, and I wanted to support that. I don't now see a party that represents me, a working class woman who is in poverty. I can't make ends meet, she says. We rely on handouts in our family, and we're going to get poorer under the Tories. I don't see Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party sticking it to them, sticking up for us. I haven't seen an effective opposition, she says, in Parliament, especially during PMQs. And then she says something which is slightly heartrending, but I think she's right. Marcus Rashford has done more for my family than Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Not my words, hers. And she's speaking for many people I encounter at the co-op at the end of our street and in the rest of the communities I represent. There is a hunger for change out there. But if anybody still believed that Keir Starmer was going to lead a movement for change of the kind this country needs up to the beginning of this conference, we now know those people with those illusions need to abandon them, because what we've seen... What we've seen is a series of retreats. We already heard about the divisions which the leadership has created in our movement, where we should be trying to unify. But let me just take one issue. Amy's already mentioned it, the energy sector. Now, if ever there was an area which required radical policies, it's energy. Our planet's burning, and you cannot address the needs of our planet without some form of common or public ownership of the energy industry as a whole. Now, that is Labour Party policy. It was in the manifesto, which hasn't yet been abandoned as far as I can see, though we're well down the track of abandoning parts of it. And the Labour Party conference this weekend passed the Green New Deal with common ownership right at its core. You cannot deliver the changes we need, never mind dealing with fuel poverty and the situation facing so many workers in the industry without common ownership. It's not possible. But what did we see? We saw Keir Starmer that morning abandoning his own personal pledge for public ownership, and then after the conference, we saw the Shadow Chancellor saying there's something similar. Well, look, I stand by Labour Party policy, and that is what we should all know. Our policy is not decided by our leader. It's decided by our movement. And so let me just very quickly then come to where I think we are, because what I think we have is a leadership which is trying the old trick of presenting itself as though it believes in social democracy, the idea that you need to transform or even to end capitalist society in the interest of working people. That is the central idea of the labour movement, this transformative idea in the interest of working people, or you see social democracy fall away into a form of revisionism, which abandons the idea that we're here there to represent and promote the interests of working people, but instead bows the knee to the power of capital and wealth. That revisionism is right at the core of the Keir Starmer project. I'm sorry to say that, because he has the same party card in his pocket as I have in mine. I want to see a Labour Prime Minister sooner than later. But the fact is, we will not go down that track if we continue with this revisionist policy. So what's necessary? I think there are two, and I'm going to be very, very brief now, two separate processes. One is we need to make the argument that the kind of society which we inhabit is a fundamentally divided society where the cleavage is along the lines of class, not geography, where there are 33 million people who work for a living in our country. And of course, there are differences. I'll come to that in a second. The first thing is, if we want to transform our country and deliver for working people, we need a set of policies which understand that that's a fundamental cleavage. Whatever you bind the need to capital, you are not dealing with the needs of working people. Now, we know that as well as that cleavage, there are other cleavages, whether it's sexuality, race, gender, and all the other issues which matter to us. All of those need to be part of our perspective too. We have to recognize a heterogeneous society, but class divisions lie at the heart of what's wrong with our society. That's my first point. Win the argument, develop analysis, win the argument, and secondly, then build a movement on the back of your analysis. And building a movement means understanding that the fight for social justice never was won purely in the House of Commons. That if you mess around, tinker around with the system, and even proposing progressive alliances or changes to the voting system, all of those may be necessary, but they are not going to deliver the kind of movement which is needed to build a radical, transformative government. And so building a movement is our second task, winning the argument and building the movement. But the movement cannot be command and control, top down. We tell you what to think, we change your policy even though you voted for it 2 hours ago. That is not going to work. We need a horizontal, a lateral, a network movement. And we need to understand that the movement which we build will be inside and outside. Inside Parliament and outside Parliament. Inside the trade unions, inside the other community movements which we see up and down our country, the kind which Momentum represents, a new kind of movement for change. And only when we've created the conditions where there's a majority of people who understands our analysis and it comes into contact with our movement, can we really expect a radical Labour government to deliver on its promise? Now let me just finish then with this thought, because I've always felt that there was a red thread which runs through our movement, throughout all of its history. The people who established our movement back in the 18th, 19th century, as it began to develop, many of them understood that you cannot compromise with capitalism, with the powers of capital. They understood that you needed fundamental and radical change. And that thread began as a very small thread. From time to time in our history, it grew into a great wide tapestry, an inspiring movement as the one which Jeremy built. But there were other times too when that movement developed in that way, and it will again, and it can again. But there were other times when that thread was down to a single fine filament, stretched taut to the point where it might break. But it never did, because of people like you. And I am determined, while I've got power in my body, that we will continue to maintain that red thread and build it back into a wide movement as it is. So here's my very final point. Think about this conference this weekend. The leadership attempted to bring a series of attacks on the left, but the Jeremy Coalition, the radical trade unions, the movement, Momentum, left MPs, the trade unions I mentioned, all of those came together at this conference, and we were not defeated. The central proposal to change the way in which the leadership was elected was defeated. So that red thread is not just a single thread, a single filament. We are still alive, we're still fighting. Comrades, we can still win this, but let's stick together. And anybody who thinks about leaving our movement, I say this to them. Did the Tolpuddle martyrs, who were threatened with being sent off to Australia, pack it in the first time there were signs of defeat? Or the Chartists? Or think about the suffragettes? No. Every time they were attacked, they came back stronger. And that's what we must do, comrades. We are not defeated. We can win this. In the end, we will. Thank you very much.